Hey, welcome back. Today, let's chat about Miracle on 34th Street, the book versus the movie. Let's go. The version of the movie I'm going to be talking about is the original 1947 film. So I was looking into this movie and I was surprised to find that at the same time the movie was released, a novella was also released. So Valentine Davies brought this story idea to director George Seaton. George then wrote the screenplay and then he also directed the movie while Valentine wrote the novella. And then both of these works were released simultaneously in 1947. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. So since both of these works were created at the same time and released together, I was expecting them to be a one-to-one comparison in terms of storytelling. And for the most part, they were, but not as much as I was expecting. So Valentine's wife, Elizabeth, wrote an introduction for this novella, and she indicated that the next step was a very casual telling of the idea to our longtime close friends, George and Phyllis Seaton. From that moment, the problem became not for Val to sell the idea to George, but for George to sell the idea to Val. That was the beginning of a perfect collaboration. Through story, treatment, screenplay, production, and book, it was a sharing process. And then in the author's note, Valentine makes it pretty clear that the screenplay was finished before the book was finished. It was indicated that it was only after he had come to life upon the screen that he was invented to appear within the covers of a book. So prior to making this video, I had never seen Miracle on 34th Street, not the 1947 version or the remake from 1994. And honestly, I didn't know the plot of the story either. So I started by reading the book first. And while I was reading it, I was just confused on who the target audience for this book was. And I think most of my confusion came from I read the illustrated version of the book. So there was one illustration per chapter, and this version of the book was copyright in 1984. So I'm unsure if they released this version trying to make it more geared towards children, but the story plot of the book, it kind of felt a lot like Santa meets Law and Order, and I wasn't really prepared for that. So right away in the book, we open on Kris Kringle, and he is in an old folks home, and the staff doctor is evaluating him. And he deems him as crazy because he believes he's Santa. And basically the doctor says that he either has to be institutionalized or he can't live in this old folks home anymore. And so I'm reading this and I'm expecting this wholesome Christmas story, but instead you're telling me that you're kicking this nice old gentleman out of his home around Christmas time. I was like, oh, okay. I did not expect the story to begin like that, especially when they have these really sweet illustrations along with them telling me that he's being kicked out. And then also right away in the story, I was really surprised that Kris started complaining about the commercialism of Christmas immediately. A shopping service offered to make all purchases of Christmas gifts well in advance of the holiday and save the subscriber 10% in the bargain. All you have to do is send us the names and ages of all of the people you wish to remember, Kris read aloud. We will relieve you of the irksome necessity of Christmas shopping. Angrily, Kris threw the paper on the floor. Is this what Christmas has degenerated into, Doctor? It's pure commercialism. Is there no true Christmas spirit left in the world? Dr. Pierce was afraid not. Christmas had certainly been commercialized. It had become big business, and the spirit behind it seemed to be lost in the milling crowds that packed all the stores. So I found it super interesting that already in the 1940s, they were writing about and complaining about the commercialism of Christmas being too much. But then you fast forward to today, people are also complaining about the same thing. And then in the introduction of the book that's written by the author's wife, she indicated that Valentine had come up with this story for Miracle on 34th Street because of the commercialism of Christmas. She says, but it was not until years later, the war years, that the sight of the glaring commercialism surrounding the Christmas season struck my husband. He turned to me and asked, what would Santa say if he could see this? And thus Miracle was born. So that is the basis of Kris Kringle's main goal throughout the story, is to kind of not lean on the commercialism of Christmas. So kind of getting back to the story, we have Kris being chucked out of the nursing home. So he decides that he'll go and stay with his friend Jim, who runs the Central Park Zoo. So we go there with him, and while we're there, we learn that he has this special way with the reindeer. They'll come to him when they won't come to Jim at all, and So it's kind of alluding to the fact that he is Santa. And while he's at the zoo, he hears and he sees the prep for the R.H. Macy department store parade. So Chris going to the setup of the parade is kind of where the book and the movie storylines start to merge. So in the movie, we don't have like the nursing home scene or like the zoo scene. Instead, we open up with Chris harassing this store owner when he's walking by a storefront about how the reindeer are organized in his display.
I mean, you've got Cupid where Blitzen should be.
So then in the book and in the movie, we have Chris going to the parade, and he's giving the parade Santa a lesson on how to correctly crack the reindeer whip. And in the process of doing this, he learns that the Macys Santa has been hitting the bottle. And this is where we meet Doris Walker, who is the parade organizer, and she proceeds to fire the drunk Santa, and then Chris is hired. Once the parade is underway, Doris goes home, and we learn that her 6-year-old daughter is in neighbor Fred's house watching the parade. And this is where the book proceeds to tell us that Fred would like to have more than a casual friendship with Doris, but Doris's divorce was hard on her, and now she's having troubles trusting men. Young and attractive, Fred Gailey was a lawyer with one of the city's oldest law firms. Being neighbors, he and Susan had become great pals, and out of this had grown a pleasant and casual friendship between Fred and Doris. It was far more casual than Fred would have liked. So that is a little bit different than in the movie. In the movie, when she goes to collect Susan from Fred's house, they make it seem like this is the first time that Fred and Doris have ever met.
Hello, I'm Susan's mother.
Yes, I know. Won't you come in? Susie's told me quite a lot about you. I'm Fred Gailey.
Yes, I know. Susan's told me quite a lot about you, too.
But even with that being the case, I do have to say I felt like the movie did a much better job of conveying that Fred was interested in Doris. So in the book, he's kind of awkwardly telling us this, but like in the movie, we could see how interested Fred was in Doris versus like just kind of like this awkward being like, Fred wants more. And I also thought that Susan was really well casted in the movie. So in the book, we're told how serious Susan was like for being a child, but I thought this was also better conveyed in the film. The actress that played her did a really good job of showing like her sassy seriousness. So now moving forward, the book and the movie continue to align pretty closely in terms of storyline. So Chris is hired as working as the Macy's Santa. He's telling people where they can go to buy gifts if Macy's doesn't have them in stock. Mr. Macy ends up loving this, which I had to harken back to him not liking the commercialism of Christmas, but then him basically being like, you have to go to these specific places to get your kids' toys. So I do just kind of feel like that was a bit conflicting. So Chris being hired at Macy's, he kind of continues to keep telling people that he is the real Santa Claus, and that kind of weirds people out. So then Chris gets evaluated by Macy's on-staff psychologist. And the book stated that Dr. Sawyer was Macy's expert on vocational guidance in psychology, but the book story doesn't really do a great job of telling us like why Macy's has an on-staff psychologist. But Chris is seen by Dr. Sawyer since they're super concerned about him being like, I'm the real Santa. But then it's kind of decided that like, oh, it's not much of a concern. Like he doesn't really seem that dangerous. He's not violent, and so they just kind of move on. So then we have Chris go to dinner at Doris's house with Susan and Fred very eagerly invites Chris to stay with him. So in the movie, we get this really funny scene of them like getting ready to go to sleep in their matching twin beds at Fred's house because like, of course, it's a movie from the 40s. So it's like this super normal thing to have like these two grown men like sleeping in twin beds next to each other. So then in the book, it's talked about how Chris is starting to spend a lot of time with Susan. And Chris is trying to work on getting like Doris and Susan to believe in like the magic of Christmas. So Chris takes Susan to the zoo, and this is where she tells him that she wants a house for Christmas. Well, but Chris knows that Doris wouldn't be able to afford a house on her own, so he decides to play matchmaker with Doris and Fred so that the three of them, Doris, Fred, and Susan, can move into a house together and be a new happy family. So then we have another plot point where the book kind of diverts from the movie a bit. So one day after Chris's shift, he basically just disappears. And Fred and Doris are all worried about where he could be. So they spend like the evening going around the city looking for him, and they get like closer together. And this was all Chris's plan, of course, because then Fred gets home and then Chris is just there asleep and he's been there all night. And Chris is like, oh, did you guys have fun today? And Fred's like, oh, wow, okay, so this was a plan. So he goes over to Doris's to tell her like, hey, I found him. And then they end up spending more time together, and then they share a kiss. And then Chris's matchmaking is complete. So in the book and in the movie, we see Doris, Fred, and Susan all spending time with Chris, like getting to know each other. But then in the book, one evening, Doris is hosting a presentation with Dr. Sawyer from earlier, the one that had evaluated Chris, Macys on-staff psychologist. But they're having a presentation about exploding the myth of Santa Claus. And Doris had organized this prior to Chris being in their lives. So Chris is at their house and he sees the flyer for the talk. He gets upset. He decides to go there and crash the talk. And then him and Dr. Sawyer get into this altercation. And this whole scene was not in the movie at all, which it was kind of humorous because like Santa is like behind the stage and the stage is decorated as Christmas. But Dr. Sawyer's like giving this like serious talk, and so people see like this Santa Claus figure like in the background, and they're all like, what is happening? But Santa's getting like really, really mad. And so I feel like this would have been like kind of a humorous scene to add into the movie. But instead in the movie, for the altercation between Dr. Sawyer and Kris Kringle, Chris is talking to this person that he's befriended at Macys. And we find out that he has daily sessions with Dr. Sawyer, and he likes to like dress up as Santa and like help the kids and stuff, but Dr. Sawyer is like discouraging that, and so that makes Chris mad. And so he goes to Dr. Sawyer's office and he hits him and he knocks him out. So the book and the movie both had us kind of having an altercation between Chris and Dr. Sawyer. But they just kind of went about it different ways. In the end, the altercation was not so great for Chris. So because of this altercation, everybody at Macys like decide that Chris has gotten violent and that he needs to be taken away to a psych ward to be examined. But then while he's there, he answers all of the evaluation questions wrong and he fails on purpose. But then now, since he failed the testing, they won't release him. So now is when the story kind of starts to get into like the Law and Order type stuff. So Fred is his lawyer, and in the book and in the movie, we have scenes with like the judge and the trial and like kind of talking about like politics. And the movie and the book just kind of got very boring at this point. Like for some reason, we're having this trial over this man who thinks he's Santa. And we even have this scene from the movie.
You see, they're having, well, sort of a trial about him.
You mean like for a murder?
Oh, no, it isn't that kind of a trial. It's just because he says he's Santa Claus.
So even Susan is like, oh, is it something big? And we're like, no, he just thinks he's Santa and he's crazy and we really need to do a trial about this. It was just so weird for me, like storytelling wise. Like, I don't understand why they decided to take the story in this direction. Like the story was like wholesome and like we're like kind of breaking down the walls of like Susan and Doris, and he's kind of like completing his goal of like wanting them to like get into the spirit of Christmas and things like that. And then we just kind of like throw in this trial stuff. But that's what happened. And then for the resolution, like spoiler alert, Chris gets deemed as the real Santa because the post office sent all of the mail that they had addressed to Santa to the courthouse. And Fred's argument in the trial is that the post office isn't allowed to give mail to people who it wasn't intended to. So therefore he has to be the real Santa. Oh, and then like as an ending side note, Chris directs Doris, Fred, and Susan to this house. And of course, it's exactly the same house that Susan had like wanted. And we see that it's like newly vacated and there's a for sale sign in the yard. So Susan got her Christmas wish from Santa, but it was kind of cryptic because they see like a cane in the corner of the room, like the one that Chris uses. And they're like, oh my gosh, did he have something to do with this? And like all I could see was like Chris like forcing this family out of their home because Susan needed her Christmas wish.
Maybe. Maybe I didn't do such a wonderful thing after all.
Like it just so happened that the exact house that Susan wanted was this house that was newly vacated and he directed them there. But the story ended with them being like a big happy family. So that's good. So that's the story in a nutshell. The movie definitely had a very specific charm to it, with it being a movie from the 40s, like the proper way that they talked, to their outfits and their hairstyles. Like I thought everybody in the movie just looked so fabulous. And I definitely enjoyed watching the movie more than I enjoyed reading the book. Overall, the book just felt a little bit off, and I don't feel like it did a very good job of conveying the story as good as the movie did. So the storytelling in the movie felt very natural, and like while I wasn't completely engrossed with the movie, at the same time, I can see why it would be labeled as like a Christmas classic. But with the book, I didn't even know it existed. And I really couldn't even find that much information about the book. I think the book just isn't as widely known simply because the movie's just better. And having them both be released at the same time, the book simply just got overshadowed by the movie. Thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. I do hope you have a safe and happy holiday, and we'll see you next time. Bye!